Hi everyone, my name is Jocabet Solano Miselis from Cunadule Nation in Panama, working in Memoria Indigena, Indigenous memory. I'm born at the time my people celebrate the time of Barduni. This is the time with very important for our people to celebrate medicinal plants. I will be your moderator for today. Thank you for joining the third episode of this special series, How to Indigenous Governance and Diplomacy for the Now. Today we are going to talk some of the world leading Indigenous people representatives and aliens to discuss perspectives and practical ideas of this important topic. They are all leaders in their respective field and commit to inspire and empower Indigenous people around the world. Some quick things. The webinar series we recorded and repurposed for the Gomaluku podcast. Please engage with each other in this conversation through the chat or comments. Let each other know that what your answer will be to a question. If you have heard a good quote, please help us keep the conversation going on Twitter, #HowToIndigenous_now, and you can tag Ghazali in your post, Gomaluku. Feel free to share any question, screenshot, or feedback. We hope you enjoy episode 2 of the webinar series. The next episode will be tomorrow, Saturday, July 25th, 2 p.m. GMT+2, with 8 new guests from all over the world. You can see it up right now. Go to link. We thank the interpreter for their amazing support, the guests for sharing their thoughts and time, and the partners in the special series, Tuomas Aslak DOCIP, Drumbeat Media, and TV Indigena. Please help us keep the conversation going on Twitter, How to Indigenous Now, and thank you for watching and hope to see you tomorrow. Ghazali, how are you? How do you doing? How do you feeling today, knowing we have a special guest in this time? These people have a lot of experience in the struggle coexisting in the face of the rights of Indigenous people.
I'm doing very well, thank you, and thank you for helping me host this whole thing. Episode 1 was already very interesting, and then we have 8 new guests already lined up for this one, and then, like you said, the next one will be tomorrow. Yeah, very excited. I'm telling it, everyone, like, I'm super excited for all this to happen. I got up early this morning, actually, because one of our guests, she had Claire Charters from Aotearoa. She wasn't able to be, because it's now like almost 2 in the night in New Zealand. So I had to get up early in the morning and to pre-record her segment. She really wanted to do this, but she couldn't. She has kids and young kids, so she had to. So we did it early in the morning. So I'm also very excited for that. And yeah, what do you expect? How, any thoughts? Okay, or
yeah. And then we are very excited for have these wonderful people here in this webinar now. And then we want to introduce our first guest now. We're exciting. This leader very inspirational around the world. Our first guest is Jocelyn Ting-Hui. Sorry for the pronounce about your name. Tuhi Martujados, the Winder Public now as a Jocelyn from the Casabacan community of the Pinu Human people in Taiwan. She was the co-chair of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, founded the LIMA, LIMA, Taiwan Indigenous Youth Working Group in 2013, with the vision to connect Indigenous youth across the borders and continents. Since in 2014, she also started to work as an Indigenous journalist. Ghazali.
Yeah, I'm super excited for having Jocelyn on the show. Like, to be honest, like, one of the first names that came into my mind when I wanted to do this, has a very interesting story to share from a Taiwanese, not only from a Taiwanese point of view, indigenous Taiwanese point of view, but also from a point of view of, indigenous youth. Perseverance is something that comes to my mind when I think about Jocelyn. Jocelyn, how are you doing? And what time is it over there in Taiwan?
It's around 8 in the evening. It's just because I'm actually in Ali Mountain. It's one of the famous mountain we have. And here is, of course, indigenous territory. And I'm here for a young talent training program for international participation. And actually, if you want to see, I'm at a parking lot under a street pole to see, so I can have the light. Yeah, because it's actually a cultural night tonight for the youth, and also with this program, they invite the ambassadors in Taiwan to join their cultural night. So they are having a party there, and so I'm going to join them after this talk. That's why I have to be outside, because it's too loud inside.
Oh, well, thank you so much. let me jump in right into the first question. We're going to go back to them. Like I said, inspiration for a lot of indigenous youth. What advice would you give to young indigenous students or youth struggling to decide what to pursue in life? Because I know that there's a lot of indigenous youth out there struggling with that can also benefit their community. Any thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I just got this one inspiration from an elder the other days. He was telling us that as indigenous peoples, for a very long time, because of all this colonization, because we are different from the mainstream, so we are so afraid to be the perfect one. We don't want to be perfect. We just want to be normal. We just want to be ordinary, because then we will not stand out. People will not notice us so much. So this is something really like hit me in heart, because that's so true. When I was growing up, I was told all the time that you should not be so different. You should be, just like the others. Don't ask questions and don't argue with the teachers, and also try to get whiter skin, because I'm brown. And in a lot of cultures, if you have brown skin, it's not pretty. That means that you are from a lower class in the society. But now I really, find that we were in a very long time, we were so afraid of being perfect. But now what I would like to give this, it's not only for the young people, but also for myself. I'm still young. I consider myself still young anyway. But anyway, I think it's really the time for us not to hesitate to be the perfect one. And also because once we are not afraid of being the perfect one, we will find a way to really present ourselves. We will really, not afraid to be so different. That means we can really show the people that we speak different language, we think differently, we see things differently, and we respond to challenges, we respond to the for example, like natural disasters differently. So just, be brave and be perfect. And we are perfect anyway. It's just for a very long time we are hidden, and we are trying to hide from others to recognize that actually we are perfect.
Jocelyn, before I move on to the next question, what is your Twitter handle so people can tweet and talk to you? And also, I think I forgot to say that you can use the interpretation, by the way, for this webinar series. So just you can see the interpretation feature. So you can just click on English, Spanish, French, or Russian. Well, not just for you, Jocelyn, but others as well.
Well, let me check my Twitter. I'm not so sure about my Twitter handle. Wait. Hold on a second.
While you're scrolling, like I said, perseverance. You're representative for Indigenous peoples in Taiwan, and you've been participating in the UN for like 10 years, co-chair of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus for a very long time. but only have been able to deliver a speech once. Remember that very moment in a closed meeting of the Pyramid Forum. Whilst others would have thrown in the towel like years ago, you kept going on for like 10 years. Perseverance is a key quality, in my view, in diplomacy. What is a lesson that you would like to share and would like to transmit to other Indigenous peoples that are also participating in international context?
Well, first, okay, so my Twitter handle is Jocelyn, Jocelyn, Jinumutw. It's very long. I will type it in the chat room.
Sure, yeah, and I'll show it in the post, yeah.
Yeah, and so as to the question, well, first, actually, it's 50 years, 2006. That was my very first time to the United Nations when I was in college. And so that time, well, actually, I've been delivering statement for several times, but it's on behalf of the Youth Caucus. So it's not on my personal, it's not, I was not representing myself or Indigenous peoples in Taiwan. I was representing the Youth Caucus or the Women's Caucus. And yeah, in 2016, I think that was the time. That was the very first time I was able to say my name and tell people that I'm from Taiwan. And yeah, I was really representing myself and also the group of youth who were supporting me at that time. And so, well, of course, it's frustrating that, for example, I think Tanya also know about that. There's the time that the statement of the Youth Caucus will be checked because they need to make sure that we didn't mention Taiwan in the statement. They have to make sure that people will not know there's a Taiwanese or there are some Taiwanese indigenous that is mentioning in the statement. But I would say for me, patience is important. So, and also we are not doing that for our personal interest. It's for overall, like a lot of Indigenous people around the world, we are suffering with the same issues, especially the young people. We are really encountering similar situations, similar challenges. So even though with the statement, we cannot say directly it's from this situation is in Taiwan, but it's actually all the situation we have mentioned, all the recommendation we have proposed are about us. It's about us. It's not, it's also, we also participate in the process of discussion. We come up with all these statements, these recommendations all together. So I will say sometimes it's from the holistic point of view that we are there and we have been there. It's just, so I will say that for me, it would not be a problem that I cannot tell people my name at the for example, like the conference room. But a lot of people know me because we are active in other perspective anyway. We are making people to notice us by other means. So, and also I know that if we want to achieve a goal, there are a lot of different steps. We cannot just go over 100 steps to the final line. We have to go one by one, and maybe that will take many years. But as long as I can see we are making progress, it's encouraging enough. And I have to say, I'm very lucky. I have friends, I have partners like Ghazali, like Tanya, like Tuomas, and also we have strong supporter like Kenneth. Kenneth has been really like supportive to us. So I think still, even though we have this kind of situation, but we are very lucky that people, they care about us. They want to know about our situation, our issues, and also they try to include us in the discussion. So yeah, I think that's more meaningful than being called at the conference room without being able to say something true.
All right, so a couple of things in there that are very interesting, and so like trying to get your voice out there, perseverance, being creative, in terms of trying to get your message out there. What a lot of people don't know is that you were a TV host in Taiwan. Like I assume that is also like a way of getting the message, like experiences and everything out there. What do people think about of what you did, and how the digital media changed your community?
Well, first, I'm no longer working with a TV station anymore, but still, I'm still quite proud of myself about my work, what I have done. So one thing we did is very experimental. It's just something like this now, that we invite like young, like indigenous youth who might be just, in high school and who have never had experience with media. But what we see is that they are really doing something good for their community, even though it seems like the thing seems really minor. For example, like I have one guest, they are hosting these basketball games in the community. And people will think, what's that to do? What's basketball game to do with indigenous peoples? Well, that's a very effective way to attract teenagers to stay in the community and also to make friends with other teenagers in the community. So it looks very minor, but it really changed the community a lot, because then the young people, the youth, the teenagers, they will gather, and besides playing basketball, they will also talk about what happened with their family, what happened in the community. And also when it comes to the ceremonies, the rituals, they will also be there, because if it's just one teenager, he or she will be really shy. But if it's a group of teenagers, they will be brave. They would like to go around as a group. So this is something I did with my one of my TV program. And even though this program was closed in 2017, but until now, 3 years after, I still I still meet some young people. They are still talking about this program, because it's encouraging to them. It really show them that it doesn't matter if we want to say that we are trying to work in or to advancing our rights, it's not necessary to be involved in politics or to be on the street to protest. It can be as minor as just I stay in the community, I take care of the elders, I learn my own language, and that's something very important. But we tend to, I don't know, think it's too minor, so it's not that important. But it's not true. It's the base of everything.
Yeah,
And
we have a very romantic view of stuff like that. So it's very good. Thank you so much for highlighting that. Sorry.
yeah, and you say the digital media. Well, I think that's something in a way beneficial, but in other way very dangerous, of course, because with all these smartphones, we can be media ourselves. Like with our Twitter or Facebook, we can make films, we can make news as well. But then, of course, that will make it a lot easier for us to transmit the message, and it will be a lot easier for us to connect with each other, even though that I don't live in my community, but still, because this social media or this digital media we can use, we are very close. But of course, the danger is also there, is that there are a lot of fake news, and because of this all these medias, sometimes it's difficult for us to tell if it's fake news or if it's the truth. So especially for our elders, because every time when there's a crisis, for example, COVID-19, there are a lot of rumors online. I think it's everywhere. There's something like this. A lot of rumors online, yeah, a lot of rumors, and then we have to create more videos, more messages, more news on our digital media to transmit it, to clarify those rumors. So, but I will still say that, and if we look at a holistic way, the development of digital media is very helpful for Indigenous community, because then we will have the way to make us heard, and also we can interpret the messages ourselves, and we decide what kind of sentence, what kind of information we want to present, instead of like before, we only have all this mainstream media, then they are the one to decide how they are going to interpret our culture. And a lot of times, of course, there are a lot of mistakes, stereotypes, or they only look at one part of our culture and neglect the rest of it. So yeah, it's helpful, but of course dangerous. We have to be cautious about that.
Sure. Jocelyn, I know we're running a little bit out of time, but I want to give you like 90 more seconds. What have we not touched upon that you're proud of, curious about, want other Indigenous peoples to think about? Anything that comes up in your mind?
Again, sorry.
Sorry. What have we not touched upon that you're proud of, curious about, or want other Indigenous peoples to think about for the last 90 seconds? Any final message maybe?
Oh, difficult. Okay. So now I'm working in politics. And one thing that I really realize is that, you know, we always think Indigenous people, we need to have our own politicians. But once we have our own people in the politics, out of sudden, we keep distant from them, or we change our support to them to only demand. And that's really something I am struggling now, that a lot of people, they support me to go into politics. But once, just like now, I'm in politics, all the support become demands. They're asking me to do this and that. But when I need advices, because, you know, in politics, you need talent, and also you need to be trained. I'm still in the traineeship as a politician, but I really feel lonely because I don't have so much support anymore, because they think you are on the other side, you know. So what I want to say is that I think Tanya maybe will have the same experience. I don't know, but anyway, what I want to say is that we, of course, we have to have someone in the politics, in the mainstream politics, not only Indigenous politics, but mainstream politics, in the government, in the parliament. Also, we have to go with them in this process. We have to accompany them. We have to support them. It's not that they are very lonely. And that's also why a lot of politicians, Indigenous politicians, once they are inside the room, you think they changed. It's also because they are too lonely, they are too helpless. So sometimes they lost their direction. So I would say that's something I would like to share finally, that, you know, just don't, of course, we will have different expectations to Indigenous politicians. Just don't forget, they are also our people. We, in a lot of ways, we should also support them and stay with them.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. I can hear people already singing it now, so like I think they want you back with them. Thank you so much for your time, and definitely like we'll keep in touch and talk more about everything that you're working on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye. Hoka, who's next?
Thank you. The next guest is Claire Charters. Dr. Claire Charters is an associate professor at the University of Auckland Law School. Claire's primary area of research in Indigenous people rights in international and constitutional law, often with a comparative focus. She has worked extensively on Indigenous people rights at an international level, including for the United Nations Office of the High Commissioners for Human Rights, and as an advisor to the United Nations President of the General Assembly.
All right. So, like I said in the intro, like she was not able to be live with us, so we pre-recorded the segment with Dr. Claire Charters. So here it is. Sorry about that. I'll just have to figure out like how the whole sound thing
Простите,
works.
пришла небольшая проблема с проверкой звука.
And I think it should work right now.
Сейчас
Kowea,
должно.
which is also an iwi in central North Island. It's really funny having questions like that because I certainly don't see
Очень здорово, что все можно так сделать.
myself as someone that one should particularly look up to, actually, and I think about the people, particularly the women who have guided me and guided in the Indigenous movement who have made such a tremendous contribution, and I think about their qualities, and I guess some of the qualities that I've admired in those women, and something I hope that I can emulate to some extent, is a level of persistence and determination. I think there are unique issues, I think, facing Indigenous women, and they are not the same across different regions. But I think that determination is really important, that idea that if you set your mind to a particular goal, that you persevere. And I think you see that coming through in the Indigenous movement generally, but also with particular characters like I think of Andrea Carmen, for example. I think of Miena. I think of lots of them. I shouldn't start daily. I shouldn't start naming Vicky. I really shouldn't start naming because it's the list is long. But I think in the Indigenous movement, we've outlasted many of the state delegates just because we're not doing this as a job particularly, or so for some of us it is a job too, but it's not. Your motivation is not employment. Your motivation is Indigenous people's rights, and so the determination pays off. And you might have moments, and I can certainly remember moments in the declaration negotiations where it just seemed futile and you weren't going to get anywhere and you couldn't see a way through, and then suddenly there'd be some unexpected breakthrough, and it might have been because particular delegates on the state side changed, and then you had a new dynamic, or policy might change. And so I think that determination is something I would really stress. I see that now in the enhancing Indigenous people's participation at the UN process, which has been a really rocky road, and it's not finished, and we haven't yet achieved what we want to achieve. But I think the determination will pay off in the end, because you're arguing for what is just and what is right. And I think trying to be positive at the end of the day, it might be small steps and then the surprise big step, but at the end of the day, if you persevere, that justice in the arguments will win over.
You touched upon enhanced participation.
Yeah.
As a PGA advisor, and thank you so much for doing that as well. Really appreciate it for that.
It was a privilege.
Hopefully you continue in the process, of course. Last year's enhanced participation have been very challenging.
Yes.
Anything that you think, just your thoughts, your observations, Indigenous people should do to turn that around?
Yes, I think we need really cohesive cross-regional support and energy. And that's a hard thing to ask for. And one thing that I've noticed as a change in the Indigenous movement is that Indigenous advocates are spread quite thinly across a range of issues, be it human rights, be it climate change, be it, whatever the issues will be. Sorry about the noise in the background. But I think that if we can galvanize sufficient Indigenous support cross-regionally, and sort out our own internal issues first, so that they can't be exploited by states who are less enthused by the idea of greater participation, then I think we'll get a lot further. So, for example, there's been a tension between, I think, particularly North American and Māori
for example, Indigenous peoples from those states who really have some traction within their states, because it's not participation is something that those states support. But there are states, I'm thinking especially of Asia and some of Africa, where there's complete and utter rejection of greater participation, particularly in the GA. So I think if Indigenous peoples in all those regions can come together and very strongly sort out what our internal issues and the differences are, and have a strategy around that we will get a lot further. And we do have, as Indigenous peoples, different objectives. Increased participation at the UN is for some Indigenous peoples not necessarily a priority, because there are other pressing priorities, be they domestic or other pressing priorities at the international level. You know, I named some other issues ongoing, like climate change clearly is an important one. So yeah, we need to work together in that way, and that's quite hard now at the moment with travel restrictions and that kind of thing. But I do wonder, and I've been reflecting on this over the last week actually, I do wonder whether the sort of coronavirus era might be something that we can use in a, I mean, I don't want to say positive way, because there's nothing much positive about coronavirus at all, but whether there's an opportunity there to get some traction at the UN when people are thinking about other things. And sometimes that's not a bad thing to do. And there have been some leaps made when sort of a little bit under the radar. And I wonder whether we can do something there, and that requires coordination too. And there's some tremendous leadership coming through, which I've been heartened to see.
Thank you so much for that, because I 100% agree with what you're saying. One more question to pick your brain a little bit more about PJ, about your role as a PJ advisor.
Yeah.
What can people learn from how you interacted with the states as an advisor? Like, what did you see, and what is this one thing that you would like to convey or transmit to other Indigenous peoples?
I'm not sure if I've got one thing.
Whatever
There've been quite a few things, but there's lots of things going through my mind. One thing, so I was co-Indigenous advisor with three advisors, but another Indigenous advisor, which was James Anaya. I think he and I tag teamed quite well on the good cop, bad cop kind of role in dealing with states. Having someone like Jim Anaya meant that you had the kind of legal authority, like he's probably the most well-known international lawyer on Indigenous people's rights globally. So having his expertise in what we would call mana was really important. I think one thing that in that sort of the four of us working together, we could take on particular roles, and so the state advisors were a lot better in kind of dealing with the states directly. Jim and I took more of a role in liaising, I guess, between Indigenous groups and state groups. I think you have to build on relationships with states, and then in some cases we had, and I would say with a couple of delegates, the relationships weren't that good, and you had to invest a lot of energy in trying to have to communicate with one another, but a lot of people take it really personally, and I think that was a hard lesson for me to learn, was that not to take it personally, but to keep building and trying to maintain relationships. So there's a few ideas in there, I think, but the process wasn't terribly, I mean, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was unsuccessful. I think we made a lot of ground, but at the end of the day, in this most recent process, I think the states who were less enthusiastic about, or downright objecting to enhanced participation for Indigenous peoples, they were very clever at coming together and exploiting issues around the definition of Indigenous peoples, exploiting issues around the sort of state-centric nature of the United Nations. I mean, you're trying to get into a club, if you like, that is state-centric, and it's those very states that have colonized and oppressed Indigenous peoples. Like, there's some deeply structural problem and issue there, and they were very good at exploiting that. So you have to try, and I think in the future it'd be good to realize that and strategizing together in a way to come up with arguments that respond to that well.
And this is a different question, and I think that this can be very interesting, maybe a little bit fun for you as well. Honest assessment, or like your thoughts on Indigenous people's sovereignty. What do you see? What would you like to see? Maybe that's a better question. And maybe, well, like, what's the first step that Indigenous peoples can take on that?
So on the sovereignty question, I'd prefer to focus more on Aotearoa, just because I wouldn't want to speak or have no real authority with respect to other Indigenous peoples' claims to sovereignty. I think in Aotearoa, well, I don't know actually where to start in a way, but in Aotearoa, there is a big movement for greater sovereignty. There always has since the first time of colonisation. I think we're really coming to a point where there's some willingness to entertain fundamental constitutional transformation when there's realising the sovereignty that was guaranteed under our Treaty of Waitangi. And I think that is that's come up because it's a question of time, and people realise that New Zealand's constitutional structure remains illegitimate until there's recognition of Māori sovereignty and recognition of that in some way. You know, there's every day I think it's important to question the state's claim to absolute sovereignty and to assert sovereignty. And in the coronavirus era, what we did see was Māori asserting sovereignty to protect their own borders around our own tribal boundaries. And that was really important. And that was I think has led to some advances, because the state was quite keen on that, because they then could focus resources elsewhere. It was, you know, in that confusing time of just trying to protect people from getting coronavirus. So that assertion of sovereignty was kind of well received at that particular moment, and that was really important, and regulation allowed for that. So I can see my daughter coming in. So pop it, Danny. It's not a good time to come through. Yeah. No, Danny, it's time to go out. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So the other thing is I think with the sovereignty movement is to combine with the international movement is really important. So that it's really important for Māori to be working with other Indigenous peoples to see what is possible and what is appropriate for forms of sovereignty in 2020. Is it complete absolute independence, or is it shared jurisdiction, or is it something, or personal jurisdiction over people? Like, how do you do that kind of practically to realise our aspirations? One interesting and difficult thing I feel is that we're getting to a stage where Māori stand up and exercise and trying to find those expertise and governance authority and a governance power, and to do that well for such a long time because you've been oppressed and colonised. So that's a challenge, I think, for Indigenous people, working out how to do that properly.
Yeah, final question is like, do you have anything that we did not touch upon that you still want to talk about a little bit more, or want Indigenous people to think about maybe?
Yeah. I think, I mean, not especially. We've covered some good ground. Thank you, Ghazali. I've enjoyed talking to you. But I think on Indigenous people, on the participation topic, I think it would be really good if we can come together to have the energy that we need to progress that issue, because I do think it is important, even if not obviously for all Indigenous peoples. It's not me to speak for other Indigenous peoples, but nonetheless, I do think it's important for all of us. Because if we want to get into these structures that undermine our own sovereignty movements, it's really important that you get into those really important state-based clubs and change them, because otherwise those structural impediments will continue to be a barrier preventing us moving forward. So I think it might not look like it's got any immediate tangible outcomes particularly, but changing the structure is essential for us to really get where we want to go in terms of sovereignty and rights, I think.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'll let you go now.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm going to go and cook those munchkins dinner now.
So apparently, so thank you so much for Claire. If you're watching, I'm not live, of course, but afterwards, thank you so much for being with us. Hoka, who's next?
Yeah, it's have been challenging and helpful to listen to our sister. We continue to listen with expectation. Our next guest is Kenneth Deere. Deere has been involved in the international indigenous movement since in 1987, when he first attended the Working Group on Indigenous Population. He was involved in the development of the Declaration of the Right of Indigenous People until it was passed on development of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. He attended on the WCIP, a permanent forum and expert mechanism meeting since in 1987, plus many UN World Conference. He also has coordinated and chaired the Indigenous Caucus in Geneva and New York for many years.
Oh, so sorry about that. Thank you so much, Hoka. Kenneth, yeah, who does not know Kenneth? Geneva, New York, Bonn, wherever the Indigenous movement, sorry, the Indigenous Peoples movement takes us, there is Kenneth. Try to channel his way of his gravitas in meetings. At least that's what I try to do. I don't think I'm very successful in that. So thank you for being with us, Kenneth. Let me start off directly with the first question, because you're kind of like the leader when it comes to the international Indigenous Peoples movement. Introspective examination of the movement, what needs to be improved?
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. You broke up a little bit, so I probably missed some of your best words. What was the question?
Sorry. So, what do you think of the our movement, the International Indigenous Peoples movement, and what needs to be improved?
All right. Okay. Well, first of all, the movement has come a long way. You know, from when in 1987 when I first went to Geneva, there was only one avenue, and that was the Working Group on Indigenous Populations. And in the 1990s and 2000s, that just the avenues just exploded. You know, there were just so many avenues into the United Nations now. You have the Working Group on. You have the Permanent Forum, the Extra Mechanism, but you also have, you have the Convention on Biodiversity, WIPO, FAO. You have so many avenues where Indigenous people work on. So it's a much different, I guess, arena. There's so many different arenas now that Indigenous people are taking part in. I generally focus on the human rights side, with the Permanent Forum and Expert Mechanism and world conferences and stuff like that. And I think one of the things that what we call the international indigenous movement is the word movement is the key word that we have to keep moving, and we can't look at the permanent forum and the mechanism, which was doing really good work and are very, very important, but we can't look at them as the ceiling in indigenous participation. We have to look beyond, and the next levels up. The permanent forum still has to report to ECOSOC, and ECOSOC still reports to the General Assembly, and we have to get access at those levels. And that's why the whole campaign on enhanced participation of indigenous people is so important. Because we have to look beyond the mechanisms that exist right now, and build on those, and go forward. Well, one of the aspects of the permanent forum that was disturbing this year was the how states have manipulated the membership of the permanent forum, and where the chair of the Economic and Social Council, I think they changed like 12 or 13 of the 16 members of the permanent forum, and that's a problem. We're here, say from North America, we had a representative there for 3 years. We didn't ask for that representative to be changed, but however, the president of the Economic and Social Council decided to rotate the expert from North America, and that's a problem for us. And it happened in other regions where really good people like Les Melzer, who has years and years of experience. Was 3 years on a permanent forum, was eligible to stay for another 3 years. He wanted to stay for another 3 years. People in the Pacific wanted him to stay for 3 years, but yet the Economic and Social Council moved him out and put somebody else in. I think that's a problem. And the indigenous people have to have a greater say and a greater control on who we feel our experts should be at this level. And so I think that's a problem. I don't know if we can change the resolution that the modalities of the permanent forum and expert mechanism to make sure that we have a greater say on who are on these bodies, and that probably goes across the whole UN system as well in those kind of positions. We have
Kenneth,
to.
I'm going to do a little bit of a. Pardon me?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I just wanted to say, like, I'm going to do a little bit of rapid fire here. Just so like there's no bridge between the questions. What a lot of people, indigenous peoples, know is that the Haudenosaunee carry their own passports. Before people start creating their own, of course, what do you want indigenous peoples, to keep in mind? Because there's a high level of sovereignty and self-determination in there.
Our passport is an identity document, and we really Haudenosaunee use our own passport because we feel strongly about our identity, that we are a sovereign people. The Haudenosaunee is made up of 6 nations: the Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora. And we don't or board when to Geneva at the League of Nations, we felt that we can't go there as a sovereign people carrying somebody else's travel documents. So in the beginning, international travel, we traveled on our own documents, and we continue that tradition today. I have my passport right here, and it's a difficult thing to do. It's not an easy thing to if other people are thinking of using their own passports, understand that there are some times you will not be allowed to travel. There are some countries that would not allow you in. There are some airlines that might not let you aboard their planes. It's difficult, and you have to be firm, and also there has to be some relationship you got to have with the country you're with to allow to make sure that they don't stop or return to your country. It can be difficult. But I strongly advise it. I mean, I don't travel anywhere unless I travel my Haudenosaunee passport. Either if a country lets me in, they let me in. If they don't, they don't. And I don't go. The way I look at it, if a country doesn't let me in, it's their loss. We have to be pretty firm on your conviction to use your own passport.
Kenneth, let's zoom in a little bit about diplomacy. How do you decipher between a bad diplomacy strategy and that's not working and having a bad outcome? Any thoughts on that? Because you've been around for a very long time.
Yeah, there's no such thing as bad diplomacy. There's failed diplomacy, I guess. Every time you do diplomacy, you always try to put your best foot forward. I guess there is a thing called bad diplomacy. One of the things that I want to express that was really important about Indigenous diplomacy was the Indigenous Caucus in terms of in the battle for the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. One of the Indigenous people, we would meet before the working groups, either the working group on Indigenous populations or a working group on the draft declaration, and we would decide among ourselves what our positions are, and we would go there in a united front as much as possible, and that had a really big effect and impact on how we were able to deal with states, because we were unified. States were divided because Denmark and Guatemala supported the original draft of the declaration. So, and other states didn't. So the states themselves were divided, and that was good for us. But in terms of diplomacy, I always felt that Indigenous people were really the best is because we have a logical arguments. We have the high moral ground on issues of Indigenous people in terms of our self-determination, lands and territories, and rights. I'm being interrupted here somehow. Maybe I'm talking too fast.
No.
Okay. So I'm hearing the Russian in my earphones. So in terms of diplomacy, we got to look at it in a positive way, and in the sense that you always have to maintain the high moral ground on all the arguments that you put forward, and maintain that. And that's why we don't have to resort to things like terrorism, and stuff like that. And because I think our arguments are superior to the arguments that states have. So bad diplomacy is when we undermine our own arguments and we undermine our own credibility. I think that's bad diplomacy, and that's what you have to avoid. I think the Haudenosaunee has been very strong in maintaining what we call a good mind, when we only use good words with other people, using reason and rational thinking to put your arguments forward. And I think that we look at other people as equals. We don't look at states as being superior and other people as being superior. We look at ourselves as being equal to everybody and not less. And that strength and that inner strength that makes you stronger, so that you're not intimidated by states. When I go to the UN, and I'm talking not just me, I'm talking about the Haudenosaunee. We're not intimidated by ambassadors and heads of state and everything and all those, because we look at them as equals, and so that way we can function and deal with them as equals. And that might sometimes that annoys them, and that's fine. And that's not bad diplomacy to be annoying. It's what the objective is. Your objective is to assert your sovereignty, to assert your self-determination, and diplomacy is how to assert that, and getting the most cooperation from the other side. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I don't always look at things as being bad diplomacy. I just look at sometimes failed diplomacy. I don't think that's the same thing.
No, I think you answered my question in more ways than one, actually. So thank you so much for that. going a little bit deeper into self-determination, any insights and myths about that out there about Indigenous self-determination that you want to address?
I think one of the hardest self-determination was what held up the Declaration for so long, because states did not want to recognize our right to self-determination. And one of the things that that people, I mean, at least some states assumed that self-determination meant sovereignty and independence. And self-determination doesn't necessarily mean that. Yes, it does mean sovereignty. Yes, it does mean independence, but it also means other forms of self-determination, whether it be autonomy, self-government, domestic dependent, whatever other form that you have a mutually agreed to. And that's the key, is to have that relationships that's mutually agreed to between Indigenous peoples and states on how to exercise self-determination. But the governments resisted the term self-determination because they looked at it as only meaning independence, and it doesn't just mean independence. It means it's included in self-determination. In self-determination, but it's not the only way to define self-determination. As in Article 4 of the UN Declaration, Article 4 doesn't mention sovereignty, self-determination, but it mentions some other ways of also exercising self-determination. But we don't believe, but we still believe that and assert that self-determination does include sovereignty and independence, should we so want to take that political step, which is can be quite difficult.
Talking a little bit more about movement and legacy, how would you implement your experience, mindsets, kindness, knowledge into the movement and build onto your legacy for generations to come, for the youth?
Well, first of all, I'll work backwards. I am always impressed with the youth. The Youth Caucus at First Lady Planet Forum it's wonderful to see them speak, because when they take the floor and they speak, they're so pure. They're not encumbered by, they don't have baggage. They see things sometimes more clearly than people, grizzled people like old people like me who've been banging our heads against the wall. And it's wonderful to see the youth come in, because they're still innocent. so if I can use that word, not that we're guilty, but I find them so pure, and their energy is so great, and it inspires us older people. I think that young people have something to learn still from the older generation. I think in terms of diplomacy, how to deal with states, how to making sure you keep the high moral ground. Don't get distracted by extremism, like terrorism would be that extreme, and some people can be pulled into that mindset. I think that we have to make sure that Indigenous young people remember the spirituality of our people, and keep that. And I see that. I'm not saying that they're not doing that. I see that in the youth, but to make sure they maintain that. That international work is holistic. It's not just a bunch of lawyers doing this work, and it's not a bunch of activists, but it's holistic. You have the men, you have the women, you have the youth, you have the people with disabilities, you have elders, you have your spiritual component, your legal component. You got to put all these things together to move yourself forward. It's a holistic approach, and I think that's I would encourage the youth to make sure they maintain that, the youth and the elders, the men and the women, going forward together in all of these in these forums into the future. I think that we have a long way to go yet. I think we're still it's an uphill battle, and it's a struggle. And don't give up. I think working in the UN can be very, very frustrating, and it's very slow. I always tell people the UN moves at the speed of a glacier, but it does move, and you have to be patient. And in terms of climate change, glaciers are moving faster. So you look at it that way. So the UN is moving, and we have to have that patience. It's not just enough to go to the United Nations and make the big speech. We all do that. We all make the big bring back the buffalo speech, and but it's the grinding it out. It's going back and back and back and grinding out the little things. Fighting for those little words. In resolutions and outcome documents. It's the grinding out work that the young people have to understand, that the success of the declaration and other issues is the grinding out. It's the back room and the coffee shops and the hallway lobbying that gets success in the United Nations.
Any final thoughts, Kenneth, that you want to share? Something that we did not touch upon?
Well, I don't know. You sort of exhausted me already. No, but I just want to say that I think what we call the international indigenous movement is a real thing, and that although it's scattered, I think that I have I have concerns in particularly in North America. We no longer have a North American Indigenous Caucus, and I think that's a concern. There should be one, and I think that we have to continue to build on our solidarity and working together. Well, one of the concerns I do have, and going back again to the Indigenous Caucus and the old guys, the old people, is that I see a less participation from those with deep experience in the caucuses, at the permanent forum and expert mechanism, and they seem to skip the caucus and just go to the meeting. And I think that's a mistake. I think some of the people with a long experience have to maintain their presence at these caucuses and guide them and help them and help them. It doesn't mean they have to, be in the front, but they have to guide the young people who are trying hard. The old people, the older generation of people who fought for the Declaration, to the young people, they're legendary. From what I hear, and people are telling me, they hear about the hard work that they did, working on weekends, working in the evenings, making these joint statements, and presenting them at the UN. Young people hear about that, and they want to emulate that. And for them to emulate that, well, they still have to learn, from our experiences and how to do that, and when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. Because I think that there are some. The UN has changed a bit, and what we were able to do years ago might not be able to be accomplished today because of the structure of the agenda or the structure of meetings, and the caucus has to adjust to that. And sometimes they need some experience there to that old experience to guide the caucuses and to guide the youth and the younger people. People like yourself, Ghazali. I'm so impressed with all of these young people who were youth leaders are now leading. That's the next generation of leadership that's carrying the issues forward. So I want to just remind that I want to make sure that the Indigenous Caucus is strong and balanced, and with all the people with experience and the new people and all those in between are going forward together.
Thank you so much, Kenneth, for your time. I see Glenda in the background, so say hi to your wife and Tom for me, and hopefully we'll get to see you soon in real life, in person. I don't know where, but really looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Kenneth.
Well, thank you, and thank you for holding this series.
Thank you. Hoka, who's next?
Yeah, so happy to listen. Our brother there, he has a lot of wisdom, and we want to continue to learn more about his job. Well, la próxima, y lo voy a decir en español, the next one is our guest, Tania Pariona. Ella es activista indígena, ex congresista de la República de Perú, ex becaria del Alto Comisionado para los Derechos Humanos, miembro del Enlace Continental de Mujeres Indígenas de las Américas, ECMIA, ECMIA, asociada al Centro de Culturas Indígenas del Perú, Chirapac, actualmente responsable del programa de mujeres indígenas. Felizmente de invitar a nuestra hermana Tania para que nos comparta su experiencia, luchas, desafíos y sueños.
All right, Tanya, this is going to be interesting. So, because my Spanish is as good as my Chinese, so it is not it's not very very good. So let me go right into it. If you can answer this question, give you the 2 minutes. What are you seeing out there in Peru? How are you thinking right now about indigenous rights in the post, like after COVID-19 world?
Sí, bueno, en primer lugar quiero agradecer la invitación a Ghazali y me honra estar en este webinar junto con personas con muchísima sabiduría como Kenneth, hermanas como Socabet y líderes que han transitado por las Naciones Unidas, tienen un trabajo en sus países, en sus comunidades, y todo eso nos da la fortaleza para seguir trabajando también desde donde nos encontramos. En este caso, en el Perú, la situación de los pueblos indígenas es realmente preocupante porque en este contexto de la pandemia se ha exacerbado la pobreza, la desigualdad, también el racismo y la discriminación contra los pueblos indígenas. A los problemas anteriores que teníamos, como los conflictos sociales, ambientales, producto de la contaminación ambiental de las empresas extractivas, el despojo de los territorios, la falta de seguridad jurídica. Hoy nuestros territorios están sufriendo esta tragedia de la pandemia. Tenemos miles de casos de personas contagiadas, así como fallecidas. Hemos estado elevando nuestras voces para que el Estado peruano pueda tomar medidas acertadas, estrategias de intervención. Sin embargo, estas muchas veces no son tomadas en cuenta. Eso no ha significado de que bajemos la guardia, al contrario, los pueblos indígenas estamos mucho más sólidos, interviniendo, proponiendo, generando corriente de opinión pública también, porque en Perú hablar de los pueblos indígenas es hablar de minoría. Y eso es una falsedad, porque en Perú no somos una minoría étnica. En Perú somos una mayoría. Después del censo de población del año 2017, el 25% de la población, es decir, alrededor de 8 millones de peruanos se han autodefinido parte de un pueblo indígena. Entonces no somos minoría. Pero bueno, este contexto de la pandemia también está generando mucha resiliencia, mucha resistencia, mucha puesta en evidencia, además práctica, del uso de nuestros conocimientos indígenas para la prevención, para poder atender esta enfermedad del virus del COVID-19. Hay hermanos indígenas que han conformado sus pequeños comités de salud para atender a los pacientes, y cada uno desde su territorio está haciendo su esfuerzo propio. Y eso en realidad no es de ahora, porque nosotros ya vivimos, como lo decía un maestro amazónico, hemos vivido tantas pandemias, enfermedades endémicas que han generado muertes de indígenas. En la Amazonía, por ejemplo, el problema de la malaria, el dengue que mata a indígenas cada año, y otras pandemias sociales, ¿no? Como la discriminación y el racismo a los pueblos originarios, por su origen, por su lengua, por su condición física, por su pensamiento, por su identidad. Y es algo con el que luchamos permanentemente. Hay cosas buenas, hay cosas también muy, muy malas en este contexto, pero creo que lo importante es aprovechar la oportunidad para generar un cambio de conciencia humana. Hoy por hoy se valora muchísimo lo que tienen nuestros territorios, nuestros pueblos, conocimiento, biodiversidad, naturaleza, el rol de la agricultura, la nutrición, la soberanía alimentaria. Es algo del cual tenemos que sentirnos orgullosos, por supuesto.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And it's such a strong, how should I say it? Like capturing like what you're seeing. Anything you talked about, like the impacts of COVID-19. Any opportunities maybe that you see maybe in Peru or in Abya Yala, Latin America, that you can see that can be that can improve Indigenous people's rights and maybe governance and or diplomacy?
Yo creo que es una oportunidad para la visibilidad. Es muy triste saber que nos tenemos que visibilizar por la desgracia de tener muertes, de tener desatención del Estado, la falta de alimento en los territorios, etcétera. Pero creo que tenemos que sacarle la vuelta a este escenario para decir que existimos, que esa desigualdad es la que venimos arrastrando décadas y que el sistema de salud ha colapsado precisamente porque no ha habido inversión y prioridad de atender a los pueblos indígenas con un puesto de salud, con medicina, con educación de calidad. Hoy por hoy nuestros hermanos indígenas, escolares, en sus comunidades no están llevando la educación virtual como se hace en la zona urbana. ¿Por qué? Porque la conectividad digital es aún muy precaria. Entonces tenemos niños que están retrasando su educación, además a un sistema educativo que ya tenía varias falencias, pero hoy se convierte en una oportunidad para levantar la necesidad de una mejor política educativa intercultural, bilingüe, trilingüe, con maestros formados, con una inversión pública para fortalecer ese sistema educativo que hoy hace falta y que es necesaria para transformar nuestra realidad y para tener mejores condiciones de vida, pero también es una oportunidad para que los poderes donde se deciden las cosas, como por ejemplo el poder legislativo, pueda trabajar, eso es una lucha que hacemos, pero pueda trabajar la participación política de los pueblos indígenas. Yo quiero comentarles que en el Perú la participación de los pueblos indígenas es, digamos, a la suerte. Los indígenas que podamos tener suerte de llegar al Parlamento a través de un partido político, llegamos, pero no existe un mecanismo legal para garantizar la representación igualitaria en el Parlamento de los pueblos indígenas, tanto hombres y mujeres. Nosotros desde el periodo parlamentario que hemos asumido, hemos dejado varias propuestas legislativas esperando que se discutan. Estas pues tienen que tener algún tipo de presión social también. Intentamos hacer ese trabajo. Yo creo que el reto desde los pueblos indígenas es empezar a reflexionar sobre nuestro rol político en los espacios donde se deciden. Yo he aprendido muchísimo de la diplomacia indígena en el sistema de Naciones Unidas para ponerlas en práctica en mi propia experiencia parlamentaria a nivel nacional. La idea, por ejemplo, de incidir con los decisores mayores, de armar coalición con grupos temáticos, incluso con bancadas políticas opositoras frente a un tema en la que podemos coincidir, es necesaria, porque minoritarios somos en el Parlamento, porque no somos más de 1 o 2 parlamentarios que llegamos a este Congreso, y no puedes determinar una ley si eres 2 personas. Tienes que ser mayoría para calificar que tu voto va a favorecer esa ley. Entonces nosotros estamos en Perú trabajando una reforma político-electoral para tener por lo menos nosotros decimos entre 10 y 32 asientos específicos para los pueblos indígenas. Y esto es importante, ¿por qué? Porque son espacios de donde salen las leyes que pueden permitir en adelante políticas públicas, pero también porque existimos en el país. No podemos no tener presencia, voz para definir los destinos de nuestra propia vida. Entonces, yo sí creo que es una gran oportunidad para levantar estas demandas, estos sueños, estos desafíos, algo que la prensa nacional no cubría porque no había un escenario catastrófico. Hoy lo estamos teniendo lamentablemente, pero sobre eso también los pueblos indígenas estamos colocando propuestas, estamos colocando planteamientos viables y factibles.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for also highlighting all that. I have Hoka. She has a burning question for you. So Hoka, go ahead.
Hola, Tania, mucho gusto. emociona mucho escucharte, reconocer el trabajo que hacen mujeres como tú a nivel del país, en Perú, pero también a nivel regional y mundial. Quizás más mi pregunta va en relación al tema de ¿cuál propuestas crees que debería seguirse trabajando desde los estados para tener formas de política más plurinacionales que respeten la coexistencia y cosmovivencia de los pueblos indígenas? ¿Y cómo podemos interactuar dentro de estas políticas reconociéndonos, como bien dices, que somos en Perú mayoría y no minoría, de tal manera que las propuestas sean más interculturales desde las políticas?
Gracias, Jocabé, por la pregunta, y creo que es fundamental partir por el reconocimiento constitucional. Si uno no está reconocido en su constitución política como Estado-nación, y dentro de ella nosotros como naciones pluriculturales, plurilingües, no existimos. Hoy por hoy, por ejemplo, la Constitución Política del Perú tiene tal vez 2 artículos que hacen mención a pueblos indígenas en derechos básicos. Una tiene que ver para procesos de elección regional, pero lo demás es accesoria, es desde una perspectiva sobre todo cultural, ¿no? No discriminación por etnia, raza, cultura, etc. Pero no está reconociendo derechos políticos, derechos económicos, derechos sociales. Entonces, un trabajo que se puede levantar desde las capacidades de liderazgo y líderes que tienen muchísima trayectoria y que pueden dar un salto en la política bastante necesaria hoy por hoy, se puede generar este tipo de movilidad, de movilización temática. Y lo otro tiene que ver con la institucionalidad indígena. En un aparato estatal, si no tienes una institucionalidad indígena, lo más probable es que el tratamiento a los pueblos indígenas sean en una situación de marginalidad, porque no eres prioridad ni presupuestaria, ni de decisión, ni de composición de esa estructura. Hay hermanos indígenas que creen que eso contraviene contra nuestras propias formas de autogobernanza. Y yo creo que no, porque lo uno no anula lo otro. La autogobernanza propia y las formas propias de organizarnos en nuestros territorios puede seguir construyéndose y recuperándose y fortaleciéndose como tal, pero eso no implica que no podamos ser parte de un Estado del cual también somos miembros, como peruanos, como panameños, como argentinos, como latinoamericanos. Y nuestra ausencia más bien lo que ha generado es que el Estado crea que somos siempre sujetos de asistencia, que necesitamos otras representaciones, no hablando por nosotros. Entonces yo sí creo que la voz propia, la presencia física en estos espacios es fundamental, pero para eso necesitamos conocer cómo funciona el Estado, necesitamos formación política con identidad propia, con esa diplomacia, diríamos, que funciona en el mundo internacional, pero que en el plano nacional puede confluir con nuestras propias experiencias de incidencia mucho más contextualizadas, por supuesto, a nuestras realidades. Y lo otro sí tiene que ver más bien en cómo los pueblos indígenas vamos generando experiencias de buenas prácticas, ¿no? Esto que se dice, a ver, ¿qué de bueno tenemos los pueblos indígenas para que se convierta en política pública? Yo creo que tenemos muchas cosas buenas, en salud, en educación comunitaria, en conocimiento indígena, incluso en literatura, que hoy por hoy la juventud indígena está generando literatura en idiomas originarios, tecnología usada como un recurso para fortalecer las propuestas desde la perspectiva indígena. En relación a la medicina, creo que es algo del cual quienes hemos vivido en nuestras comunidades recurriendo a la medicina nuestra como primera opción, sabemos de la valiosa, digamos, existencia de esta. Porque yo, por ejemplo, siempre me he curado con plantas medicinales. Muy raras veces he tomado una medicina, una pastilla, y en mi comunidad la gente se cura con medicina natural. Obviamente hoy estamos ante una pandemia que no sabemos cuál es la medicina efectiva, curativa, definitiva, pero que están llevando a investigar incluso esos conocimientos indígenas en nuestros propios territorios para paliar la enfermedad, los síntomas, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, creo que son esas tres que yo podría decir desde el cambio de las leyes, del marco jurídico a nivel nacional importante, la institucionalidad indígena y las políticas públicas de carácter intercultural, que son tres líneas fundamentales en donde uno puede hacer un trabajo efectivo y demostrar que es posible ser tratado en igualdad en un país en donde hay una diversidad, pero que lamentablemente las relaciones de poder y los poderes fácticos se han impuesto como una ideología hegemónica desde la verticalidad sobre todo y la subordinación.
Muchas gracias, Tania, porque nos das mucho para seguir reflexionando y seguir pensando, pero también trabajando en la incidencia pública. Quizás tenemos una última pregunta y tendrías 2 minutos para responder la última pregunta y más que nada en relación al COVID-19. Y has hablado un poco sobre el tema del conocimiento, de las sabidurías ancestrales, de la medicina. De hecho, en mi presentación hablé que nací en el tiempo de las plantas medicinales, porque era el tiempo donde mi pueblo Cunadule reconoce la importancia de las plantas para los neles, que son los médicos cunas. Entonces, quiero preguntarte, ¿pudieras compartirnos alguna medicina, algún canto, alguna ceremonia, algún ritual que están haciendo en este momento los pueblos indígenas en el Perú para contrarrestar el COVID-19? Una pregunta más de conocimiento de los pueblos indígenas en el Perú.
Sí, Jacobet, en la parte de la Amazonía peruana, nuestros hermanos han conformado su propio comando COVID, comando indígena para la salud. El comando Matico se llama, y seguro algunos de ustedes conocen a Néstor Paiva, un hermano shipibo que también fue parte de los cursos de Naciones Unidas, y él ha emprendido junto con sus hermanos el comando Matico, que es un comando de salud indígena para la preparación de medicina natural con hierbas, entre ellas el matico, que es una de las plantas que ayuda a desinflamar cuando tienes la garganta inflamada, cuando tienes de repente una infección interna, ¿no? También externa para lavados externos. Eso en el lado de la Amazonía. En nosotros, en la parte andina, usamos muchísimo el eucalipto, el ajos. El ajo es común, todo el mundo lo conoce, el jengibre, el kion, la haba tostada, junto con limón, que son, digamos, de uso muy común, muy cotidiano para un resfrío, pero que parece que hoy, en esta ocasión de la pandemia, están ayudando justamente a evitar que los casos que tienen síntomas leves lleguen a ser crónicas. Entonces, la gente se está empezando a curarse de esa manera. Y en mi región, en Ayacucho, lo que se han empezado a hacer de manera comunitaria son los vaporeos. El vaporeo con hierbas, un conjunto de hierbas, entre ellas eucalipto, romero, manzanilla, una combinación de varias hierbas en cada casa. Un poco para purificarnos también, no solo en términos biológicos, ¿no? Sino también espirituales. Estas prácticas no siempre son bien vistas, no siempre son valoradas por las personas que, por supuesto, no terminan de entender nuestra cosmovisión, pero somos nosotros. O sea, no es que tenemos que rendir cuentas a quien no se siente parte de nosotros, porque en esta ocasión la gente está sobreviviendo y tiene que recurrir a sus medios propios. Entonces yo misma estoy en este momento en la capital de Perú porque me quedé aquí, dado la cuarentena hasta la fecha que no puedo retornar a mi lugar de origen, y sin embargo estoy semanalmente, diariamente consumiendo estos jarabes propios medicinales para sentirme segura, ¿verdad? Porque, bueno, hay que recurrir a eso en estos tiempos. Eso, Jacobet.
Muchas gracias, Tania, por tu tiempo. Gracias por compartir también los conocimientos de nuestros pueblos indígenas. Creemos que es muy importante y seguir orando, cantando, haciendo los ritos, las ceremonias. Gracias, Tania.
Muchas
por
gracias
tanta
a ti,
sabiduría
Jacob.
compartida también en los temas que nos has compartido hoy. Well, the next brother, he's Graham Reed, and he's from Anichinaabe. He's a mix, Anichinaabe and European descent. He works at the Assembly of First Nations, leading their involvement in federal and international climate policy, including recently as co-chair of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change at COP25. In his free time, he is completing a PhD at the University of Gale, studying the intersection of indigenous governance, environmental governance, and the climate crisis. Thank you to be here, Ghazali.
Hey, Graham, how you doing? Thank you so much. I know it's very early over there. Cool. So let's start real quick, so that you can get your cup of coffee again. What's have you changed your mind about in the last 100 days? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and thanks for this opportunity, Ghazali. It's an honor to be even included in this kind of roster of people. And don't worry, I've been drinking enough coffee already to feel good in this. Yeah, I guess my, in reflecting on this question, I think two things. One was just really over the last 100 days, I think I was kind of reaffirming my belief that the work that we do in the climate sphere is actually the exact same thing that we do when dealing with any other kind of structural inequality. And by that, I mean, climate just exacerbates and magnifies, existing challenges that we all face, mostly because of colonization. And similarly, like I see the health pandemic and Tanya's points were a perfect example of that, how this just kind of, further accelerates the things that we're already struggling for. And I think, what I've been trying to do or reflecting on the last 100 days is think about what we can do inwardly. And I've been feeling a lot of frustration and engaging in these kind of multilateral processes. And I love the points that Kenneth and Claire were raising about how do we support the Indigenous movement internationally, and focus on the kind of persistence and relationality between all of our different relatives. So I'm keen on pursuing that more, and I think spaces like this are important representations of that.
And I think, like, you being a co-chair of the Indigenous Caucus under UNFCCC, like, at least this is what I did. I just tried things, like a little bit of tasting here and there, see what works, see what does not work. I had some difficulties. Let me pick your brain a little bit. How do you create consensus as a chair dealing with the 7 regions? Do you have a checklist? What questions do you ask yourself maybe before making any, or not making, but proposing a decision or in a meeting? Yeah.
I mean, I think I think the point that Kenneth was talking about, just about the starting point, and I think the starting point is that we're all relatives fighting for the same thing, and that we might have differing opinions on how to do that, but kind of by acknowledging that our outcome is shared, I think there's an ability to figure out and discuss what are the ways to deal that, and recognizing that there is diversity. I think you kind of alluded to it. I think the role of the chair is often to kind of stand with or stand behind folks. And that kind of, for me, feels like, really I'm just trying to create the space for dialogue between regions, and the dialogue between regions requires work. It requires building relationships with people. It requires kind of ongoing check-ins outside of main meetings to make sure that folks can air what they have at the top of their mind, and also just acknowledging that there are differing personalities and ways to communicate the things that they feel. and you know, opening up space for that is really important. And you know, so I guess those are kind of check-ins, and making sure that everybody's had the ability to share what's important to them, and then thinking about something that's joint is is challenging.
Like for full disclosure, so people know, within the UNFCCC, we only have 1 hour in the morning to be able to coordinate with one another, which is very challenging, to be able to listen to all the voices. How do you deal with it, and like how do you try to facilitate all that in 1 hour?
Yeah, very difficultly. But I mean, I think, you know, I think recognizing that it is an hour is just a way to kind of scope and prioritize what people are sharing, and, you know, make sure that what we do is we essentially set out those other processes for things to get in more detail. And so I think of the 1 hour as more of just like an overview sharing type of circle, and then the kind of substantive work occurs throughout the day in smaller groups, and then we bring it back. And so it's just about kind of understanding that cycle of kind of work, report back in, kind of accountability that I think, you know, the caucus looks for in these sorts of forums.
All right, let's talk a little bit about like perspective. What the hell? Perspective and perception of a caucus. I asked this to Carson when he was as a youth chair. Biggest misconception, myths, or something that you would like to talk about, how easy or hard it is, not probably how hard it is, to lead a caucus.
Yeah, I think, you know, the misconception is that you actually lead a caucus, and like I don't necessarily see that as the role. Like, it's really about like, how do you coordinate, facilitate, and empower people to do the things that they want to do. And I think everybody comes to these spaces to, you know, articulate a concern that they have back home, to call on more action. And then I see the role of kind of a co-chair as just like opening up the space to do that, and kind of figuring out where and how we can position people in those places of conversation, instead of like really taking space and speaking on behalf. And so I've tried really hard to not do that, and tried really hard to, you know, get our youth involved, get our elders involved, and draw on their knowledge and experiences, and allow them to share. I do think, like, you know, one of the misconceptions in any sort of characterization of a caucus is that like there's an assumed uniformity. It's like everybody, because we're Indigenous, has the same perspectives. And I think like it's really important to kind of counteract that. The UN, you know, there's 7 regions, each of which have their own kind of self-determination process, even within regions. And we heard with Claire, even within, you know, within what's currently known as Canada, within First Nations, there's a massive diversity of perspectives. And so giving space for that, I think, requires, you know, agreeing on those kind of minimum standard principles, and then allowing people to elaborate based on the context that they're entering that space in.
Yeah, because like a caucus is like a UN actually within a UN. At least that's how my perspective is. Yeah, like it is nothing different than a COP or a General Assembly, and you're at the helm of it to facilitate, not to dictate, of course. Thank you so much, because like there is perspective out there that like as a caucus leader or like in a leadership role, you have to like dictate. And I'm very glad that yourself and Carson and many other, definitely the youth, they see differently, as in like it is about to facilitate the decision-making process. Thank you to elaborate more on that. You elaborated on that. How much at COPs or SBs, so that in the intersessional meetings, how much of your time as a chair is spent on conferences and meetings versus making appearances and attending social things like receptions? During COPs, for example.
Yeah, I think my my preference is to be doing the work. And I think like Kevin's point about just grinding it out is kind of what I feel is you know, one of the roles of the chair is to like do that work so that folks, you know, can take advantage of whatever materializes from that. And you know, often there are some benefits that are associated with like building social relationships with other parties and other actors. But I think that comes after, in my mind, after like doing the work and attending the conferences and the meetings and, you know, being in the hallways with folks and talking about why and how states take certain positions and really trying to understand and build that relationship in a positive way. And then spending the time actually doing the work, you know, organizing the different opportunities and you know, really getting our voice out there. And I think that's one thing that at COP25, like our comms folks, Kera and Janine and Lindsay and others like did a really wicked job is like taking up that space in a system that is like quite traumatic to Indigenous peoples. And Claire kind of spoke about, you know, this system is built on the erasure of our nations. And so like every act of you know, resilience and resurgence that we have in these spaces, I think is extremely important. And, you know, trying to make space for that is yeah, really important and was well done at COP25.
Thanks, Graham. We're running out of time. So maybe anything, I'm been asking like everyone this single question, but it gives you a little bit more space to jam, like to talk a little bit. Anything that we did not touch upon that you really want to talk about or want other Indigenous peoples to think about? Anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, I'd love to think about more like convening our own climate COP. And we had spoken about that a couple of times in the last, you know, 2 or 3 years. And I like it kind of comes back to your original question, like what has changed? And I really think like part of what's changed is the recognition that, you know, we need to create our own space. And one of those things, and Frank talks about kind of these indigenously determined contributions, like how do we do that and then invite others into that? And I think there's a really important kind of power dynamic associated with doing that. And so, yeah, I'd be really keen to work with folks to think about what that looks like and how do we bring all those different movements together to strategize, to coordinate, and to do our own things. Like I think that's something that's really important for us and for the Indigenous movement writ large, is that, you know, we retain the integrity of our voice when we create the space, and yeah, want to do that.
Yes, definitely. And Frank will be in like, I don't know, 2 episodes from now, and definitely going to talk about the IDC's individually determined contributions. We're talking about Frank, so that's Frank Adwagishik, also like I would say like a rock star. He's amazing in his the way he talks, the way he interacts with with youth, with people like Graham, myself, and as well as the diplomats and the negotiators that I want to talk to. Thank you so much, Graham. As always, your beard game is on point, and your hair game as well. Thank you so much
I
for
just
that.
got cut, yeah. Yeah, miigwech Ghazali for opening up this space, and like look forward to the rest of the episodes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Graham. Hoka, thank you so much as well for doing the last part with Tanya. Who's next, Hoka? You're on mute.
Now it's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ghazali. Our next guest is Daily Sambo. He is Inuit from Alaska, is the international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. She engaged for over 34 years as the UN, ILO, OAS, as other international fora. She's a former expert member and chairperson of the UNPFII and specialized in international indigenous human rights law, as well as political and legal relations between states and indigenous people. and is also co-chair of the International Law Association Committee on Implementation of the Indigenous Rights. Welcome, Dali.
Daily, welcome. I have to admit, when I had to chair some meetings as from a caucus, one of the persons that I look up to is the way that you the way that you chaired the Parent Forum. That was inspirational. So very much thank you for that. Let me first jump right into the first question. What are some of the challenges that you as international chair of ICC are facing in terms of governance and representation, given that the Inuit territory spans across a number of states? Yeah, so what do you keep in mind when you're speaking on behalf of the ICC?
Yana, thank you so much, Ghazali. First, let me say it's very early in the morning here. I tuned in at 5 a.m. So, and I haven't had a cup of coffee as I thought I might be able to have the chance to. This is in the hopes that I can actually fall asleep again. The program is excellent, and in terms of your specific question, indeed, the Inuit, our membership, our traditional territories and homelands spread from Chukotka in the Russian Far East throughout Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. And I think your question really brings to mind the diversity of the respective nation states that we have to deal with, who are, of course, UN member states as well. And it is quite significant that the Russian Federation, as a UN member state, but also a member of the Security Council, the United States government, the government of Canada, and the government of Denmark. So not only is it the conditions of these very distinct nation states that we have to deal with, that our membership, Inuit, our blood relations across these 4 countries have to deal with, but to be mindful of not only the circumpolar region politics and Arctic region politics, but now global politics in terms of those respective nation states. And so that's a major challenge. In addition, of course, language. And immediately, and I'm really pleased to see the Spanish-speaking opportunity here, the interpretation, the technology that supports that. But we have real difficulties and challenges with the use of the Russian language in our communications with the 2,000 or so Siberian Yupik who are members in Chukotka. So that's significant. The other dimension to all of this is the uneven treatment of the rights of our membership across these different national governments. And I think we go from, for example, the conditions in Greenland, where there's been peaceful dialogue for some time about the exercise of the right of self-determination and the real future of Greenland, the potential independence of Greenland, and the situation and circumstance for our membership in the Russian Federation, where there's direct and overt control of everything that they do in their day-to-day lives, and the ability for them to freely take on engagement at the United Nations, for example, or for our organization as the Inuit Circumpolar Council to provide support to them, provide financial support to them without being labeled as foreign agents. And these are very real challenges. And in terms of your second question about what to keep in mind when speaking on behalf of the ICC, that's a little easier to deal with, because we have a fairly well-developed leadership process. We have our general assemblies. Our executive council is composed of membership from each of the 4 regions in the Arctic. We occupy, in terms of our traditional homeland, just over 40% of the Arctic region. We view that in a holistic fashion. The decision-making that we undertake is collectively and together. So there are challenges in terms of representation at the international level, but at the same time, we have a very good way of bringing forward the Inuit voice in a wide range of intergovernmental and other international fora.
Daly, I know for a fact that you're a very strong supporter of the right to self-determination. You talk a lot about that during the Perm Forum and other contexts. Having also listened to or talked to Professor Megan Davis, your colleague, former colleague at the Perm Forum, she alluded to that we don't talk about self-determination anymore, as not as much as we should be, and more about free, prior, informed consent, FPIC. What, in your mind, in your view, what debates or what do we need to do to bring it back?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that it's important for us to recognize that all of the provisions of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples are sourced in self-determination, right? Self-determination is understood to be the prerequisite to the exercise and the enjoyment of all other human rights. And so when we are talking about our food security, when we are talking about our rights to lands, territories, and resources, when we are talking about the right to free, prior, and informed consent, when we're talking about the right to control our own educational institutions, we are really talking about expressing our right to self-determination in many different contexts. And so I think that if we understand that free, prior, and informed consent is sourced in the right of self-determination, that it takes on and is imbued with an even more significant cultural context on the part of Indigenous peoples. I think that it really underscores how inseparable self-determination is from every action of advocacy that we as Indigenous peoples individually or collectively undertake at all different scales, at the local level, at the regional level, the national level, and at the international level. And I think that there's been probably more discussion about the right of self-determination in the efforts of Indigenous peoples at the national or the domestic level, so maybe less so in terms of the huge debates that we had throughout the negotiation of the UN Declaration. I heard Kenneth Deere speak earlier about those significant debates and how much time was consumed on just resolving the issue of the right of self-determination. So potentially at the national and the domestic level, where the provisions of the UN Declaration or where the rubber hits the road in terms of resolving and redefining and reorienting and reconceptualizing the relationship between Indigenous peoples and nation states, that more of this dialogue is taking place. And it's largely because of the denial of the right of self-determination, the lack of explicit recognition of and respect for the right of self-determination by national governments that has created the need to have a debate, the need to have a discussion. So in my view, more power to the Indigenous peoples at the local and the national level who are bringing these issues forward in an intellectually honest fashion and willing to engage in the discussion about how to accommodate Indigenous peoples.
Daily, one question actually that's been emerging not only in meetings with states, but like in general, is about the rights of Indigenous people. People don't understand what it is. Well, they do understand, and I'm talking about non-Indigenous peoples. What is the biggest misunderstanding states have about Indigenous people's rights?
I think that that hasn't changed much over the nearly 40, 50 years or however long we've been doing this. I can't count anymore. I think that the fear that the sky will fall if in fact they recognize and respect our rights, our fundamental human rights. And I think that self-determination is an example of that the unwillingness to recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples in whatever context and discrete dialogue that may be undertaken. The idea that, and maybe it really comes from, they don't know any better because they've just taken the attitude that they have the power to decide and impose upon us, to control us, to own us. You know, you hear that often in statements by the U.S. is very well known for this, that our Indigenous peoples, you know, this and that's a big misunderstanding in and of itself, as though we're subjects to be owned and that they have the power to do with us whatever they want to do, overlooking entirely our rights, including the right of self-determination. I think that some of the other misunderstandings about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People specifically is that somehow this important international human rights instrument creates new rights, when in fact, we're talking about pre-existing or inherent rights that we have held long before the emergence of the modern nation state in international law, in international affairs. And I think this is another huge misconception, misunderstanding on the part of states, that these pre-existing or inherent rights have been important to Indigenous peoples well before contact, and that they remain important to Indigenous peoples and our very survival as distinct peoples on the planet. So I think that there are probably many other misunderstandings that I could point to, but really in the end of the day, I think that much of it pivots on this notion of the primacy of the nation state and the primacy of their political institutions in all affairs, political or legal or cultural, and in a wide range of ways. So it's hard to pinpoint any one particular misunderstanding, but I think that it's pretty clear that there are a wide range of them. Otherwise, Indigenous peoples would be enjoying and exercising their human rights. Yeah.
Absolutely. You're now also a member to the facilitator working group on under the UNFCCC, so on climate change, which is on the platform on traditional knowledge. There's a rise, quote unquote, rise of traditional knowledge. UNFCCC, BBNJ, what we also talk about a little bit offline. Yeah, there's a rise. Are you excited or concerned?
Let's see, first let me say that myself and the Inuit Circumpolar Council and the discussions that we've had about this important topic have settled on the use of the term Indigenous knowledge for a host of different reasons. That the knowledge that we have accumulated certainly is based upon traditional practices, but it represents the knowledge that we hold here and now, and knowledge that we'll accumulate into the future, and that it attaches to us and our identity as Indigenous peoples. I think that it is exciting might not be the term, but I think that it's important that the international community, that the world community, and specifically the different treaty arenas that have emerged around us, like the UNFCCC, are interested in Indigenous perspectives and in Indigenous knowledge. I think it's very, very important, but I don't think that they completely understand what we're talking about. You know, that we have systematic ways of knowing that based upon observations and skill, and they're not quite sure what we're talking about. And I think in large part because of that, it's been extremely helpful for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for example, to recognize in their special report on oceans and the cryosphere, to underscore the significance of the knowledge that Inuit have to sea ice and conditions within our unique environment, Inuit Nunat, the environment that we know so much about, based upon generations of accumulated and intricate and highly developed and sophisticated knowledge. And even it conjures up the quote from Eben Hobson, who's recognized as the founder of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, who stated in 1977, when we gathered together to organize the ICC, that our language contains the intricate knowledge of the ice that we have seen no others demonstrate. And this remains true to this day. So I think that, for now, the IPCC's report and the opportunity to uplift the knowledge that we do have in order to find solutions to the problems that all of humanity is facing is significant. I am concerned, however, about the idea that, oh yeah, we can just create a big depository of all the knowledge of Indigenous peoples and make it available for anybody to Google by keyword, and grabbing and taking knowledge out of context and applying it out of context and misusing it, abusing it, or exploiting it, and the notions of Western science and how they treat Indigenous knowledge. I'm deeply concerned about that. So when you mention the local communities and Indigenous Peoples platform of the UNFCCC and the facilitative working group as a constitutive body in that process, that we create the safeguards and protect the rights of Indigenous peoples to their knowledge, as well as their right to maintain and control how that knowledge is used. And that ultimately will allow for real respect for and recognition of Indigenous knowledge holders. And so in terms of the future of the co-production of knowledge with Indigenous peoples, there's a host of guidelines and protocols that have to be developed in order to really achieve ethical co-production of knowledge. So I think there are avenues and opportunities, but at the same time, we need respect for guidelines and protocols and the safeguarding of our knowledge.
Thank you so much, Daly. I know we can talk a lot longer about this, but it's very early over there, and So hopefully, yeah, you brought a lot of value to the whole episode and then to the whole series. Thank you so much, and definitely looking forward to talking more about like everything that we just talked about. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ghazali. And I hope that before you cut me off, I hope that at some point in time we can tackle the issue of local communities, because I think this
Sure,
problematic.
go ahead. Like, we have a little bit more time. So it's a local communities, indigenous peoples. What is the nuance? What is it, something that you want to tackle on that?
Well, I think that as has been indicated by the and Graham was instrumental in this, the letter that was sent from the Indigenous Peoples Forum on climate change to others within the whole UNFCCC system about the need for a clear and explicit distinction between Indigenous peoples and local communities is absolutely crucial. And that letter highlighted the need that, you know, the system, and in particular nation state, the parties within that treaty cannot equate the rights of Indigenous peoples to local communities. That they're, and in fact, my reference to pre-existing or inherent rights is one of the key elements of the distinctions between so-called local communities, and we're not sure who they are and where they are. My guess is that it has emerged because there are governments that refuse to accept that there are Indigenous peoples within their set state territories. That's a different argument. That's a different matter when you have non-recognition of Indigenous peoples. But to then bring on a term like local communities without fully understanding the history, the source, the content of the rights of Indigenous peoples, the pre-existing rights, the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples, especially to self-determination, our collective political right to self-determination, as well as our rights to lands, territories, and resources, which is a very distinct cluster of rights that is highly significant to Indigenous peoples, that a distinction has to be made, and it has to be understood in order for us to safeguard the integrity of the rights that have been affirmed in the UN Declaration, for example. And again, local communities, we're uncertain of what's being talked about here. There is no definition in the UNFCCC context. I haven't seen a crowd of local community representatives, you know, have a caucus meeting or a dialogue or discussion and insert themselves in a way that that is significant and important to Indigenous peoples. There's much more that I could say about this, but I do know that you have other guests that you're inviting to the program. But I think it's an area that we have to watch very closely in terms of developments, especially when there's an attempt by others to link rights to so-called local communities and to utilize it in a way that would undermine or diminish the rights, the hard-fought rights and the recognition of those rights by the international community in the form of the UN declarations. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words about that. But I also, again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daly. Thank you for interrupting me so you can talk about this, because I've been seeing it emerge, the whole discussion all over the world in terms of like the different processes. So I think this is definitely very valuable. Thank you so much for cutting me off and talk about this. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay.
Appreciate it. Hoka,
yeah, it's very exciting to listen in our sister Daly, her wisdom. The next guest is Ms. Chandra Roy. Henrikensen has led since 2010 the Indigenous People and Development Branch Secretariat of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues at the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs. Chandra is a lawyer by training with specialization in international law, human rights, and Indigenous people. She received her Bachelor of Law from Punjab University, Pakistan, and her Master in Law from the American University, Washington, D.C., USA. Welcome.
Welcome, Chandra. Sorry for what we did run a little bit over time, but like the something that Daly wanted to share was very interesting. I think also very important for Indigenous peoples all around the world and non-Indigenous peoples as well to understand the nuance between local Indigenous peoples and local communities. Chandra, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. First of all, thank you all very much for inviting me to this panel. It's actually been a very interesting and inspiring discussion. And Ghazali, hats off to you for getting this together and doing this series of talks. Really looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, when I started this web series, there was I have to admit there was a list, and like on top of the list was Chandra Roy Henriksen. There's a lot of people go to the Prima Forum, and a lot of people try to address the United Nations through the Prima Forum. But like they don't know like the dynamics behind it and who's trying to. I can imagine that is a very challenging role for you to. Sorry, not challenging, demanding. Like demands a lot of you and your staff. So, if you can, many people do not have an idea to use the Prima Forum effectively, and we're talking about effectiveness in this one. What is the biggest misunderstanding, or do you have any tips for Indigenous peoples on how to make very effective use of the Prima Forum?
Well, first of all, it's really good today. I was looking through the list you have of your speakers, and it's been excellent to actually see many of the old faces. Just before me was Daly, and she, as you know, was the chairperson of one of the chairpersons of the forum. To say that I always tell my colleagues, and I am very lucky, very privileged that I have a fantastic team of colleagues who work with me, all of them extremely dedicated, committed. We are kind of like, I say that we're like the kabuki dancers, in this Japanese art form, or also in Indonesia, you have the puppets or the real people. And then behind you have the ones who have to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And we are like that we can only be as strong in our team as strong as the permanent forum is. Now, the permanent forum, since it started in 2002, was the first session, has been increasing and gaining momentum in recognition, and it has now very much acknowledged, recognized, and respected as providing the global forum, the global space for Indigenous peoples from all around the world to come, voice their concerns, their views, but also engage with the member states and the UN agencies, NGOs, academics, and others. And I believe this is one of the ways that the permanent forum has evolved. I was involved, as were many of the others, when the permanent forum was first being established. And it has actually come to fruition in that way, as that this is what we had envisioned, that it would be at a very high level. There would be engagement, networking, contacts, advocacy. And my first tip, I would say, suggestion to participants who come to the permanent forum is that make sure you use the space, use this opportunity, use the connections, use the networking. This year, unfortunately, we could not have the forum session as in previous years, and it was because the forum members decided in their wisdom that it would be very risky to place Indigenous peoples in this kind of a situation with the pandemic raging as it was, and also taking into view the travel restrictions, people going back. So, but for participants who come to the forum, you have the 16 members of the forum who will prepare the report with recommendations to the agencies, member states. But you also have there with you, and the forum has done this with its convening power, brought together member states, UN agencies, NGOs, academics, and others. And that's where I believe the permanent forum participants can direct their advocacy and their efforts. Talk to one of the UN agencies. Why is X, Y, and Z not being taken in my country? I'm just thinking earlier, I was listening to Tanya in Peru. For instance, the UN system in Peru, what are they doing for indigenous peoples in COVID, if not in COVID, in governance? You know, and this is where you can use that. And we are there to help you make these appointments, these discussions, and we're happy to do so for you.
Thank you so much, Chandra, because a lot of people think that it's just about sitting in the chair, for, waiting for your 3 minutes and then leave. But there is so much more things that you can do, and like you said, make use of the platform and be in the room and making connections. And so, thank you so much for really emphasizing that. Permanent Forum was supposed to be held. Of course, COVID-19 happened. Take us through the process of learning that Permanent Forum was postponed, what did you think? Like, would it become a negative impact on Indigenous people's advocacy? What were your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, you know, to postpone a event of such importance and such magnitude, it's a very serious decision. And I'll just take you through chronologically. In February, the Permanent Forum members, there's a new 12 members and 4 continuing members. They organized, at the invitation of the Finnish government and the parliament of the Sami parliament in Finland, they went for a pre-sessional meeting in Finland, in Inari. And this was at the beginning of February. And already then the coronavirus had started. In fact, there was also one case in Inari, in Finland, where we were. And when we came back to New York, it just grew exponentially, the virus. And the first meeting that was, even larger than the Permanent Forum session in a way, is the Commission on the Status of Women. And that was supposed to be the first week of March, and that had to be postponed, which meant that this would have repercussions for the other meetings. And we then relayed this to the Permanent Forum members, and we had to do it virtually like this with telecoms and all, and said that this is a situation, what do you think should happen? And we are here. We, of course, from the UN, the Secretary General himself had offered guidance that in this kind of situation, it would be very irresponsible for the UN to convene large gatherings where you cannot guarantee the safety and security of the participants coming and leaving or being able to return to their countries, and then the aftermath of what happens in the countries they return to. And for Indigenous peoples, and this was very much picked up by the Permanent Forum members, that many of the Indigenous participants who come to the forum come from very remote and often isolated communities. They come, you meet in this huge gathering of 1,200 people plus, and then you go back to your communities. And as you know, with this pandemic, it's very difficult to know where it is, how. It's very hidden and it's very insidious. And so the Permanent Forum members decided that this would not be the right situation, the right context in which to organize the annual session. And they decided that this would not take place as had been originally planned. It was with great, they gave it extremely serious consideration. Of course, we offered our advice, our suggestions, and it was thus decided that they would not have the Permanent Forum session. Now, I just want to mention that internally, there are all these procedural issues that also have to be discussed. And we relayed this back to the forum members because we were trying to see if it would be possible to have one later in the year. Of course, as you know, the situation has evolved to such stage. It's very difficult to foretell any of that. However, we wanted to make sure that the Permanent Forum session for next year was firmly in place. So the forum members then prepared the agenda, the discussions, the dates, And they have actually forwarded this to the Economic and Social Council, which is their parent body. And it has been adopted and agreed by the Economic and Social Council. So the next session is firmly in place for April 19 to 30, 2021. Hopefully it will be able to take place, but as you know, it's still very much uncertain in terms of the circumstances as and when there will be a virus or the situation will be resolved for the safety and security of all.
Thank you so much, Chandra, for laying that all out so that people understand like that it's not an easy decision that the Secretariat and the members had to make, but it was a well thought over decision. Not an easy decision, definitely not. Zooming in a little bit on on the UN and like Indigenous peoples, what are you sensing then? That's going to happen within the United Nations that will potentially impact or might have an impact on Indigenous governance or maybe diplomacy. Any thoughts on that?
You know, the UN is also looking at how the UN has been for the last 75 years. And now the first thing you have to remember, and this was brought up by some of your earlier participants, that a lot of the decisions are actually taken by member states. However, Indigenous peoples play a very, very important role in terms of advocacy, lobbying, advocating for their rights, voicing their concerns. And now, of course, we have the 2030 Development Agenda. And the basic principle of that is to leave no one behind. However, from the anecdotal and evidence-based analysis that is coming up, it says that yes, Indigenous peoples will be among those who are most likely to be left behind. So in this kind of scenario, there are entry points. You have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, 2007, and it was prepared, adopted at, I believe it was the Indigenous peoples who made it happen. Indigenous peoples also made happen. There was a World Conference on Indigenous Peoples in 2014. Ghazali, you were very much involved in that. And as a result of the 2014 World Conference, there is a system-wide action plan on the rights of Indigenous peoples. Now, linked to that, there is also a current process which is going on about changing the way the UN works and making it more relevant and more actual. We have to remember that this was 75 years ago, and now it's a different environment we work in. So the UN is also trying to respond to this. The UN is doing its best to be agile and flexible. It's a huge, huge bureaucracy. It is decisions are taken by member states. So it sometimes takes a while to get things moving. We got the declaration after 20 years, the World Conference in 2014, and now you have the system-wide action plan. You have the 2030 Development Agenda, which makes specific references to Indigenous peoples. Only happened because Indigenous peoples, with the support of member states, made it into the actual outcome documents. Now you have these opportunities, and with the development to reform process that is ongoing, and from our team, and that's one of the effects of that is our team has actually been increased. We are now the Indigenous Peoples and Development Branch. Earlier we were only for the Secretariat as of the Permanent Forum. And the reason for that is because we are actually being called upon to do more, not just for the forum, but additional to. We always did that earlier, but now with the System-wide Action Plan, the 2030 Agenda, it's become much more prominent and much more in demand. So because of that, using these entry points, the development system also has to change. Take more cognizance, take more recognition and actually action for Indigenous peoples, wherever they may be. And with the 2030 Agenda, one of the advantages compared to the MDGs, where Indigenous peoples were invisible, is that with the 2030 Agenda, it is not just for developing countries, it is universal in application. And thus Indigenous peoples, wherever they may be, whether they're in Norway, Sweden, Finland, Alaska, or US or Canada, Australia, or in Peru or Kenya or wherever, this is all related, and that they should be able to be more responsive to this.
Forgot to put me on unmute. Thank you, Chandra. Quickly, like what we're seeing now is COVID exposes like also the hyper transparency of the world around us, except for diplomacy, which is still very closed, relatively closed. Do you see anywhere like where do you see the need for transparency and where not?
You know, COVID has taken everybody unawares. Nobody was prepared for a pandemic of this scale. And you actually, it shows us how interrelated everything is and everyone is. That, you know, there's one sneeze in some remote area in one of the isolated communities, and then this goes off all the way to, let's say, the major cities of New York and Paris. We, for instance, I'm based in New York, the UN is here, and this has been the hardest hit when it first struck. Now, in terms of Indigenous peoples, and we have, just to mention that we have opened up a web page on our UN DESA site for Indigenous peoples to send in their questions and their experiences and their advocacy and messages, and we're putting that up there. For Indigenous peoples, they are very often not included in the COVID responses, or if they are included, it is not to the extent that they need to be. And we are hearing alarming reports of medical facilities not being available in Indigenous communities. Now, already Indigenous peoples face major challenges in accessing medical facilities. Now with COVID, this has made it even worse. And in some countries, it is to such extent that you have Indigenous peoples trying to do what they can themselves in their communities, but it is not enough. And of course, for that, we have actually been talking to the UN system. And we have prepared from our team, and there's an interagency support group on Indigenous peoples from all the UN agencies, and they are the ones who have prepared guidance for the UN country teams to say that when you work on COVID responses, you must make special efforts, otherwise you do not include Indigenous peoples. And in this, the very important is Indigenous women, who are among those who are the hardest hit, and Indigenous youth and children. And just a quick comment that for Indigenous children now with the COVID and distance learning, they have not been able to access that because they don't have computers. And if they do have computers, Wi-Fi is not available in their villages. So it is kind of like a double jeopardy in a way that first, wherever they are schooled, they don't have the facilities for distance learning. And these are all issues that are very, very urgent, very real in terms of also food security and the reports of hunger in many of the Indigenous communities.
Thank you so much, Chandra. Any final thoughts? Something that we didn't talk about that you really want to address or want Indigenous people to think about?
Two things. One is to do a little bit of propaganda because, you know, with COVID, 9th August is the International Indigenous Peoples Day. And the theme for this year's commemorative event, which will be held on the 10th of August in the morning, virtually, will be on the pandemic and Indigenous peoples. And we want to show how Indigenous peoples are not really sitting and waiting for things to come to them, because in many cases they are not coming. They are taking matters in their own hand. But what has been the response of the member states? What has been the response of the UN system in helping with that? That's one thing. The other one I wanted to just say is that for Indigenous peoples, and I think Ghazali, you mentioned it, that coming to the UN, making a speech has an impact, but that is not the impact only of your presence at UN meetings. And it's not just at the UN here in New York, it's when you go to Geneva, when you go to Rome, when you go to Nairobi or to wherever the UN has a presence. make sure that you go and talk to the UN people, UN colleagues who are there. They have to listen to you, make an appointment, talk to them, lay your concerns out, but also in the same time, when you have the opportunity, engage with member states, talk to them, explain to them. And in the discussions this morning, I was listening a lot and how clearly the message was getting across that Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. They also want to have the right to determine their own priorities and take part in the episode and take part in the discussions and the decisions as to what is their development priorities and how they can be involved and participate to make sure that the UN Declaration is a reality. We were 20 years struggling for that. We have it now. Make sure it is used and implemented and helps Indigenous peoples all over the world.
Thank you so much, Chandra, for your time. I know you're very busy. It's very early right now in New York. Be safe.
Not too early, 10:30.
You're working from home now, or you?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
all working from home. They're trying to see how and when they can go back. But Ghazali, always here for you all. And thank you very much for having me. And anytime, just, we're all here, not just me, also my team, my colleagues, fantastic colleagues, all here for you. Thank you. And stay safe.
Thank you so much, Chandra.
Thank you.
Yes, you too, and your team as well. Hoka, that's it. Unfortunately, Mr. Belkacem Lunes was not able to participate, so we're hoping that we can bring him to the one of the next episodes. So what do you think? Your first time as hosting with me this webinar series. What do you think?
Thank you, Ghazali. It has been inspired challenge to hear about the struggle on various issues such as self-determination, pointing out and remembering that the rights of Indigena people is not new. It's very ancestral, very millenarian. That we are recognized in the Forum of Indigenous Nation is another point. That the rights of Indigenous people is an ancient matter. The importance of the conclave, facilitation, empowerment of Indigenous brothers and sisters, courage and important youth participation, but also intergenerational relationships. The challenges of the COVID-19 and the ancestral knowledge is a proposal in our nation, but also to continue working the public incidents in the policies that include the proposal of the way of the organization, medicine from the indigenous worldview, the importance of looking for other alternatives to continue working in the midst of the struggle of indigenous people, even though we cannot meet in permanent forums. A path that is necessary that the new generation continue to embrace from the wisdom of grandmother and grandfather. I think it's very important that all our sisters and brothers say we need to continue to be united and to understand we are Indigenous people, very specific in our context, but we have the same struggle, and if we continue working together, we are resistant and resilient for many, many centuries, and now it's time to continue to be together. Thank you, Ghazali. I don't know if you understand what I tried to say, but muchas gracias.
No, thank you. I understood it very well, and thank you for the recap of everything. So yeah, final word to you to say that you're moderator. So I'll give you the final words.
Thank you so much, our sister Chandra, the last one, and everyone, Kenneth, all of my sister and brother, because we are together. And gracias a la gente que está viendo en Facebook. Thank you for people follow us in Facebook. Spanish people too, Avia Yala people from Facebook, la gente de Facebook. Muchas gracias. And Ghazali, we need to continue. And like a youth woman, I think our sister and brother challenged me a lot. Thank you so much.
All right. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Next episode is tomorrow. Tomorrow, same time. Link is already active. Linktree/Gomaluku. And if you have any thoughts on this, please tweet us. And webinar will be posted online on YouTube, so you can watch it. And yeah, what else? Nothing. We're already in overtime right now. Thank you so much for watching. Interpreters, thank you so much. Guests, Hoka, thank you so much. And hopefully sign up right now for tomorrow, so we can continue with this amazing conversation. I'm letting you go. I'll go now, and have a great day and evening or morning wherever you are, and stay safe and healthy.